All right, Shabbosai, good morning, good morning. Sorry for the delay, an incredible schos. Baruch Hashem to do another daf of Gittin together. Begin by thanking all of our sponsors. Thank our Talmud Torah sponsors for the month of Sivan, Paul and Kathy Pollack. As a schus refuah shalema of Kathy's sister, Donna Baker-Matson, we hope that she has a complete and enduring refuah. Together with Kol Choli Yisrael, our week of learning sponsors, Brian and Melanie Levine, in honor of the entire shir of the Daf Yomi, Halavai V'Sha'al Bizocha and Meretz Hashem, to continue to learn together in inspiration and with Islavos and Devekas for many years to come. I thank our Daf Yomi sponsors for today, David and Roberta Schwartz, in commemoration of the 14th yard site of their cousin Dov Klein, Dov Ber Moshe Ben Chaim Menashe Zichron Livracha. We hope that in the merit of our Talmud Torah, the Neshama will have an aliyah and the family a nechama. Wonderful. So with that, let us begin. It's also important for us to recognize that today, Memorial Day, it's interesting. So unfortunately, so many other legal holidays which for us kind of represent, well, not for us, for you, represent the day off from work, right? And a little bit of, more relaxation. And sometimes we forget the important messages behind these days. In a day like Memorial Day, when we remember all of those who have fallen, who have given their lives and dedicated themselves to uphold the pillars of this country, of freedom, of democracy, of liberty, for all of its citizens. In Eretz Yisrael, the difference is wherever you go, you see soldiers, right? So you understand, it's there in your primary consciousness that there are people who are fighting for your rights each and every day. Here in America, so our wars are waged overseas. So think about it. When was the last time you ran into someone in uniform? So sometimes it's kind of out of sight, out of mind, and it's just so important. It was the Wall Street Journal on the weekend edition or Friday had the picture of one of the soldiers putting out all of the flags by the tombstones in Arlington National Cemetery. People are Moser Nefesh. People are Moser Nefesh, and people pay the ultimate price to go ahead and secure the freedoms and the rights and the gifts that we have in this country. And it's important for us to be Makir Tov, to the United States of America, to be Makir Tov to all of the servicemen and women who mamish, are often foreign lands, often fighting battles that we will never know, to be able to secure all of the rights that we enjoy here in this country. We hope HaKadosh Baruch Hu will watch over all of our soldiers. HaKadosh Baruch Hu will allow this country to be a Medina Shel Chesed, and until the great day when we are Zocha Meretz Hashem to go home, may HaKadosh Baruch Hu continue to give us the beautiful brachos that we have enjoyed in this country. So with that, let us begin. So we have a lot to do today. A lot to do today. So today's daf is Yud Gimel 13, and we are picking up in Meretz Hashem. We left off at Tanya, which is on Yud Beis and Beis 12b, 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 12, 13 lines up from the bottom. So the Gemara says as follows. The Gemara says, Tanya, Amr Rabbi Elazar, Amru lo lemeir. So we'll say ultimately again, they said to Meir, Rabbi Meir. So this is the conversation, just to recognize, this is the conversation going back in the Mishnah. So remember again, what did the Mishnah say? The Mishnah was speaking about the ability to renege on a get that was given, right? Or on a document of emancipation, a shtar shichra that was given. What does it depend on if you have the ability to renege on it? In other words, speaking on a specific case where the husband gives over the document into the hands of a shaliach, into the hands of an agent, to deliver it to his wife or to deliver it ultimately to his eved. So now the shaila is, after he's given it, does he have the ability to go ahead and renege on it? What does it depend on? It depends on if it's considered to be a zuchus, right, or a benefit, or if it's considered to be a chov, a detriment. If it's a zchus, then zachin la'adam shalom b'fanav. As soon as the agent goes in and acquires it, as soon as the agent receives it, he's acquired it on behalf of the intended recipient. If it's a chov, he hasn't. So the Tanakama, Rabbi Meir said that halacha l'maisa, you could renege on both of them, because Rabbi Meir holds that neither a get nor a get shichrar are considered to be a benefit. The Chum say he could renege He could renege on the get isha, but can't renege on the get shichrar, because he holds that emancipation of an eved is a schus, zachin la'adam shelo b'fanav, and therefore you can't renege. So Rabbi say this brisa is a continued conversation between Rabbi Meir and the Chacham. So Tanya, Rabbi Lazar, Amar lo Meir, we said to Rabbi Meir, v'alo zechus hu la'eved sheyotze mitachas yad yadei rabo l'cheiros. It is a schus to be emancipated. It's supposed to be emancipated. Amarlanu chofulo. Rabbi Meir said, no, it's not true. It's actually detrimental for a slave to be emancipated. How so? Shimhaya eved kohen poslam truma. But listen to this. If the eved, let's say, is owned by a kohen, ultimately, again, when he's owned by the kohen, then what? He has the ability to eat truma. But when he's no longer owned by the kohen, he can't eat truma. Amarlo, he said to him, Valo, ma mirtza shalol azono, v'shalol lefarnaso. Rashai, but one second, the master has the ability to say to his Eved, I'm not going to support you. So because he has the ability to Eved that he's not going to support him, so Lamais, again, even while he's an Eved, he can still lose out on support. Amar Lanu Reb Meir said to us, Uma, ilu Eved koin shebarach, the Eishes koin shemar da abayla, hala ochlim betruma. So let's say, but Reb Meir said back, let's say you have an Eved koin who runs away. An Eved koin who runs away. So let's say now the master can't find him. So because the master can't find him, therefore he can continue to eat truma. V'zeh eino ochel, and this Eved, once he's emancipated, can't eat truma. Aval isha chofula, but for a woman, it's clear that it's detrimental for her to get divorced. She came postla min truma, because if she's the wife of a kohen, she loses out on truma. Umafsida min amazonos, and she loses out on support. So we'll say this exchange doesn't make sense. The back and forth doesn't make sense. So the Gemara says, "My ka'amrulei umay kamahadar lehu." What are the rabbis saying to Rabbi Meir, and what is Rabbi Meir responding back to them? See, here we go. So the Gemara says, "Hachi kamar lehu." This is what he said to them. Hashivusini al mazonos matishivin ala truma. So ultimately, again, so Rabbi Meir says like this. Rabbi Meir says like this. So you've answered me about mazonos, because remember again, as we've established in yesterday's daf, a master has the ability to say what to his master? A master has the ability to say to his Eved, Asei imi ve'eni zancha. Right? You have that ability to say, work for me and I'm not supporting you. So I understand that maybe emancipation doesn't represent a loss of mazonos, because you could not have mazonos even while you're enslaved. But ma tishivun ala truma. But what are you going to say about truma? After all, once the master emancipates the Eved, he loses the ability to eat truma. So maybe you'll say, well, the master could throw a document of emancipation at the Eved and preclude him from eating truma anymore. So the Gemara says, after all, the Eved could also run away. And if the Eved runs away, Rabbi said, then what happens? Top of Yud Gimel, Uma ilu Eved kohen shebarach. The Eishes kohen shamar da albayla. If you have the Eved of a kohen who ran away, or the wife of a kohen who rebelled against him, they're still able to eat truma. We'll speak about that second case later on. They're still able to eat truma. And Rabbi say what this is saying is like this: if a master, let's say a kohen has an Eved, right, and the Eved runs away, so now the master can't find him. If the master can't find him, we'll say therefore what? He's still technically owned by the master. If he's owned by the master, then what? He's allowed to eat truma. He's allowed to eat truma. To which the Gemara says, and now this Eved is going to be emancipated. He can't eat truma. What do you see from here? You clearly see from here that halacha l'maisa, emancipation is a chov. So the Gemara says, Shapir ka'amar lehu. So ultimately, again, they're saying good. Rather than actually Meir is saying good. Amarava, hainu tekama hadrilei. So we'll say the rabbis go ahead and respond back to Rabbi Meir. Mipnei shu kinyano. No, you don't understand. The Eved is owned by his master. Therefore, I will say, what could the master do? Di'i by shakal arba zuzi mi Yisrael upasile kol hecha di'isei. So this is interesting. You see, the Rabbanan said, you're wrong. You think that if an Eved runs away, that he can continue to eat truma. So that's true. But what else could the master do? The master could sell him in his absence. The Eved need not be present in order for the master to sell him. The master could simply sell him. The Eved goes ahead and now is the property of someone else that can no longer eat truma. The Rabbi Meir, Tenach Eved Kohen, Eved Yisrael Ma'ikal. We'll say, even according to Rabbi Meir, all of this, remember, Rabbi Meir's whole point is that it is a chov for a woman to get divorced, and it is a chov for a slave to be emancipated. He holds that both of those are detrimental for those two parties, for the woman and for the servant, right? Rabbi Meir's whole point seems to be that the Eved loses out on certain entitlements. Specifically, if he is the Eved of a Kohen, he loses out on the opportunity to eat Truma. So the Gemara now says, by the way, Rabbi Meir, that's fine, but you're basing your whole argument on an Eved who belongs to a Kohen. What about an Eved who belongs to a Yisrael? So again, what's the benefit? What's the entitlement then of servitude? So I will say this is incredible. So my ikal meimar, Am Rabbi Shmuel bar Rabbi Yitzchak mipnei shemafsido mishivcha kinanis. I will say when an Eved is an Eved, he has the ability to go ahead and have a relationship with a shivcha, with a non-Jewish maidservant, Shivcha Kinanis, right? He's an Eved Kinani. He has the ability to have a relationship with a Shivcha Kinanis. That's a benefit. So the Gemara says, Adrabah, Hari hu matira b'vaschorin. But that's not true. Upon emancipation, Rabbi will say, what happens? Upon emancipation, the Eved becomes what? A full-fledged Jew. Upon becoming a full-fledged Jew, so halacha l'maisa, he's now entitled to marry a regular Jewish woman. Rabbi will say, this is an incredible statement. Avda befkera nechale. An Eved would rather have a life of hefkerus. We'll say, what's hefkerus? Right? Hefker means, right? What does hefker mean? Ownerless. An Eved enjoys not being bound by a code of morality. Now, that's not a totally true statement. An Eved is bound by elements of a code of morality. What it means is, an Eved enjoys having access to other slaves, to other slave women, right? Why? So the Gemara says, so zilale, Rashi says, zila means degrading. Rashi says, zolala hi be'enav, lezalzel ba kol ta'avaso. Because sometimes an Eved doesn't respect another shivcha, so ultimately, again, he'll be open to satisfying his desires with her however he pleases. Furthermore, shchichale, ultimately, she's always available to him. Upitzale, and often she's immoral. In other words, Rabbi saying the idea being avadim in general, we're known for immorality. So therefore, Rabbi say what the Gemara is saying is like this: is that an Eved Kinani, the one perk, so to speak, of his being an Eved, is that he has a lot more access to immoral women. And once he's emancipated and he becomes a full-fledged Jew, all of that is off limits. So I will say this is incredible. So Rabbi Meir says, if you ask an Eved, is it a benefit to be emancipated? Again, it's not so pashut that it is, because when he's a slave, he has access to all of this unfettered immorality. Once he becomes a free man, ultimately all of this is off limits. Rabbi Meir holds, therefore, emancipation from the perspective of the Eved is actually considered to be detrimental. I will say it's an overwhelming. So first of all, before we get into this, well, actually we're already into this. So again, I'll say it's just amazing. In Rabbi Meir's worldview, so we'll say an ability to lead an immoral life. A person would give up so many other things to have a license for immorality, which we know this because we'll say, ma'asim b'chol yom, that either ourselves or we see others make such dramatic mistakes because of immorality, right? We'll say, and again, sometimes it happens to us, that sometimes, again, I will say we engage in immoral behavior and it doesn't make any sense. I have everything in life, every single bracha, and yet for some reason I can't control myself in certain areas. Or sometimes you hear more high-profile stories of people who make mistakes, right? Missteps with lapses in morality. And you say to yourself, it doesn't make any sense. He had everything going for you in life. And why couldn't you just keep that desire in check? Because we'll see how powerful it is. This is how powerful it is. We'll say that at the end of the day, Rabbi Meir says it might actually be detrimental for the Eved to be freed. Why? Because he really enjoys having a life of immorality. That's how strong that drive is within us. And I will say it's so important to be conscious of this, because often, realizing it or not realizing it, we often make terrible mistakes with certain lapses in moral judgment simply because the desire is so strong. So I'll say, so if we kind of back up a little bit, so just the halacha l'maisa, how do we paskin? So I'll say, so the Rambam paskin is like the Chachamim. The Rambam holds that halacha l'maisa, a get shichror is a schus. A get shikhr is a schos. And therefore, again, when the master gives a shaliach, the get shikhr, the document of emancipation, to deliver to his eved, the shaliach acquires it on behalf of the eved through the mechanism of zachin la'adam shelo b'fanav. And therefore, once he hands it over to the shaliach, he can't renege. A get isha, right, when a man divorces his wife, ultimately, again, that is considered to be a chov, that is considered to be detrimental, and before that get reaches the hands of the woman, the husband does have the ability to renege. Now, that being said, we are going to see cases where a get is a schos as well. There are definitely cases where receiving a get is going to be beneficial to the woman, but kind of just like in a halachic abstract. Divorce is considered to be detrimental. Emancipation is considered to be a zechus. Good. I'll just mention, I saw a beautiful, beautiful idea in the name of the Baal Shem Tov HaKadosh. So I'll say this is such a different spin, right? What does the Gemara say? Avda behefkera nechale. So what does it mean? Right? So literally again, an eved likes a life of hefkerus, right? Hefker. I know what to. There's a better word than ownerless. Hefkera. Ruleless, if that's a word, right? In other words, an eved likes a life of hefkerus. Shabbos say, listen to this. Get ready for this. Baal Shem Tov writes, Yesh l'rameis de misha rotzi lios eved la'Hashem yisbarach tzarach lahafkir es atzmo. Rabbi say, so this is a positive statement as well. Avda, if a person wants to be an eved Hashem, person wants to be a servant of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, what does it take to be a servant of Hashem? Hefkera nechale. I have to make myself hefker. Hefker to who? Hefker to the Ribono Shel Olam. See, Rabbi say we go through life thinking that we own ourselves. We own ourselves, right? I'm in control. I'll make the decisions. I'll set the priorities. Well, if a person really wants to be an Eved of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, Avda, Hefkera nechale. Make yourself hefker to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Suddenly, it's not about what I want, but it's about what the Ribono Shel Olam wants. The priorities are set by the Ribono Shel Olam. The goals and aspirations set by the Ribono Shel Olam. You want to be an Eved Hashem? Make yourself hefker to the Ribono Shel Olam. So, Rose, by the way, is that not incredible? It's not incredible. This statement, which is talking about immorality, right? Avda b'hefkera nechale is a statement that says that Eved Kenani loves a life without moral rules. The Baal Shem Tov HaKadosh says essentially whatever is true in the Olam HaTumah, in the world of impurity, is also true just in the converse in the world of Kiddusha. And Eved Hashem, you want to be an Eved? B'hefkera nechale. Make yourself hefker, give yourself over in totality to the Ribono Shel Olam. As the Ramchal writes in his introduction, life is not about what I want to do, but life is about what the Ribono Shel Olam needs me to do. Make yourself hefker to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, and you'll be zocha miras Hashem to become an Eved Hashem. Incredible. Mishnah. Haomer, tenu get zel ishti. Man says, do a shaliach. Give this get to my wife, right? Or this document of emancipation to my Eved. Umeis. Interesting case here. We'll say now he dies, right? Let's call it this. Ruvain sends a shaliach, says to a shaliach, give this get to my wife Rachel. Or Ruvain says to the shaliach, give this get shechrer to my servant Ploni, right? To my Eved, we'll call him Eved, to my Eved. And then what happens? Before the document is delivered, ultimately he dies. So what's the halacha? Lo yitnu la'achar misa. These items cannot be given after death. Cannot be given after death. Now the truth is, there's two real different reasons over here. By the get isha, because there's no such thing as a posthumous divorce, right? So you can't deliver a get on behalf of a husband after he's dead. There's no such thing. Gittin, right? The get process by definition requires a living husband and a living wife. Right? Why doesn't it work by an Eved? Because the moment that the Adon dies, what happens, Rabbi? What happens? So the Eved becomes the Yerusha of the children. Eved is property. So the moment he dies, ultimately, again, this falls into the estate. Eved falls into the estate. On the other hand, Tenu Marali Ishploni, interesting case. If I say, let's say I say to us, right, Reuven says to a Shaliach, give a money, right, give $1,000 to Shimon, and what happens? Umeis, and Reuven dies before the gift is delivered. Yitnu la'achar misa, the get ultimately, again, can be delivered can be delivered even after death as well. Incredible. So we'll say, let's analyze. I'm Rabbi Shmuel Silber. So we'll say, we're talking now specifically about the money case, right? So the truth is, I understand the get case, and I actually understand the shtar shecher case as well. The get case, because there's no such thing as a pashumas get. The shtar shecher case, because as soon as the master dies, ultimately, again, the eved becomes property of the yarshim. What about the money case? Right, so let's focus on the money case, right? So Reuven says to a shaliach, give $1,000 to Shimon. Reuven dies, so what does the Mishnah say? So shaliach could still execute the agency and give the gift to Shimon. Now also we qualify this ruling. So I'm Rav Yitzchak bar Shmuel bar Marta, Mishmei Rav. Rav says, V'hu shetziburin umunachan b'keren zavis. Now say this is true as long as what? As long as the money literally, what it means is piled and placed in a corner. And we'll say what this means is, as long as the gift is identifiable, right? So in other words, as long as the money in question is objectively identifiable, right? It's piled up and it's in a corner. So the money is extent, the money exists and it's clearly identifiable. Rashi says, money diktani masnisim b'tziburn u'munachan amos askinan from mana zeh. In other words, we'll say Rav is setting the case up over here where Reuven says to Shaliach, you see that money over there? That money mamash that's sitting over there? Give that money to Shimon. Okay? So we'll say, my askinon. Why? What's the case over here? If we're talking about the Reuven is totally healthy, kitziburin my havi halomashach. So we'll say, it can't be a case ultimately again where Reuven is healthy, right? Why? Because Lamaisa will say the only way to acquire money is how? Through Mashiach, right? The money can't be given over just through verbal declarations. So if we're talking about a healthy person's gift, Shimon doesn't acquire the money until he does Mashiach. Rather, must he talking about a person on his deathbed. So if that's the case, ma'iriyat siburin. Why do you need the money to be piled and identified and extant? Ki ein siburin nami. Even if the money is not piled and identifiable, the gift still works. The hakaim alon divrei shchimira keksuvin v'chim surin damu. Well, see, remember again, we spoke about this already. The gift, right? The gift of a shchimira. We're going to come out in just a moment, but the gift of a shchimira, we'll say Chazal made a special takana about shchimira. Normally, in order to convey ownership of something, what do you need? A kinyan of some sort. Depends on the item. A kinyan of some sort. The exception to this rule, shchimira. Person on his deathbed. Chazal made it that halacha l'maaseh he could convey ownership of items even without a formal kinyan. So we'll say, here's what we're trying to figure out. So the Gemara, right, we spoke about a case of where halacha l'maaseh, right, Reuven says to Shaliach, give money, give this money to Shimon, right? Then what happens? Reuven dies, and now ultimately again, the Mishnah says Shaliach could still give the gift on behalf of Reuven. So Rav says, that's assuming that what? The money was identifiable. There was a pile of money in a particular corner, and Reuven said to Shaliach, give that money to Shimon. Gemara says, well, I don't understand why. If Reuven was healthy at the time of the gift, so again, verbal declaration means nothing. In order to acquire money, you have to do Mashiach. If he's a shchiv mira, if he's on his deathbed, then the truth is, the words of a shchimira are binding. So once a shchimira says to the shaliach, go ahead and give the money to Shimon, it's going to work, even if the money is not piled. So what's going on over here? Rav Zvid, so I'll say, last short lines, Rav Zvid says, the Olam Babari. We're talking about a case where Reuven was totally healthy. Ukid Rav Huna Marav, Dam Rav Huna Marav, Mana li bi'adecha, we'll say, watch this. We're going to spend a lot of time on this. Mana li bi'adecha, we'll say, listen to this. So now, imagine the following case. Imagine you have Reuven and Shimon. Reuven lent $1,000 to Shimon, right? So Reuven says to Shimon, you owe me $1,000, Tneu leploni. Now, I want you to repay that debt not to me, but to Levi. What's the halacha? B'ma'amad shlashtan kana. So I will say there's a concept we're going to learn about on Amud Beis called Ma'amad Shlashtan. Ma'amad Shlashtan means if you have three people standing together, lender, creditor, or the truth is it doesn't actually have to be, well, actually I take that back. But I'll say let's actually set it up as a case of a deposit, right? Reuven says to Shimon, I deposited $1,000 with you. Instead of giving it to me, give it to Levi. The concept of Ma'amad Shlashtan says that if the owner, right, the custodian, and the intended recipient are all standing together, an owner or depositor says to custodian, in the presence of the intended party, give it to the intended party, it works. It affects the transaction. That's called the concept of ma'amad shlashtan. So Rav Zvid wants to suggest that when Rav says that the money has to be piled up and identifiable, they could point to it, that's Stavka talking about the ma'amad shlashtan case. They're both saying, now remember again, what's the chiddush at ma'amad shlashtan? What's the chiddush? Normally, in order to acquire money, what do you have to do? What do you have to do? Meshicha. The chiddush of ma'amad shlashtan is if all three of the interested parties are all present, Ruvain could assign his interest to Levi, right? Just with words, and it works. What Rav Zvid is adding is, as long as what? The money in question is right there, right? The money in question is identifiable and present. Rav Papa says no. Rav Papa disagrees. He says, no. Rav is talking about b'shchiv mirah. No, sure, we said by shchiv mirah, shchiv mirah both say you don't need siburin. Why not? Because the words of a shchiv mirah are as if they're written and as if they're written down in a document. Ukiidach de Rav. And this reflects another view of Rav. What is the other view of Rav? Damarav, shchiv mirah sha'amar tnu, mana leploni minichasai, mana zeh nosnin, mana stam enos. It was a very interesting case. Rav says like this. Let's say if a shchiv mirah says, right, give a mana to Ploni, give a mana to so-and-so, right? If he says mana zeh, if he identifies specific money, then you could give it. If he just says money in general, you can't give it. Why not? Chashinan shema mana cover ka'amar. Ultimately, again, we're concerned about say that maybe he's referring to some type of buried treasure that he has somewhere. We don't know what he's talking about, and therefore, again, we run the risk of giving the wrong money. V'hilchasa l'kvura lo chashinan. I will say halacha l'maisa, we're not choshesh for kvura, but rather, again, when a shchiv mirah says give a mana, we just give any money from his estate. So Rabbi says, take a step back over here. So here's what we have. Let's trace this back. Right? We have the Mishnah. What does the Mishnah say? The Mishnah says that if Ruvain says to Shaliach, go ahead and give a mana to Shimon. And then what happens? Ruvain dies. Shaliach could go ahead and execute the gift. Okay? Rav comes along and says, qualifies that ruling. When is that so? When the money is tziburin or munachim b'keren zavis. The money is piled and it is in a specific place. Okay? So now the Gemara says, now we have a machlokes, Rav Zvid and Rav Papa. What's the case? So Rav Zvid wants to suggest that ultimately, again, it's a case of a bari. And I will say specifically, Rav Zvid says, this is a case of Mamad Shlashtan. The case of the Mishnah Rabbi is where Ruvain deposited money with Shimon, right? And now he says, and now he's standing there with Shimon and Levi. And he says to Shimon, the money I deposited with you, I want you to go ahead and give it to Levi. Rabbi say that is the concept of Ma'amad Shlasha, and it works. But when does it work? According to Rav, if the money is piled and identified in a particular place. Rav Papa says, no. What are we talking about over here? We're talking about a shchiv mirah. Shchiv mirah. Shabbos say again, so what's the chiddush over here? But the words of a shchiv mirah are kiksuv nichim surin damu. Why need all of this stuff tziburin? To which the Gemara says, because Rav Papa says, because Rav holds that Allah Chamaisa, the only time you give over a gift of a shchiv mirah is when he says mana zeh. He identifies specific money. But if he just says mana stam, just unqualified, right, without identifying which money, we're concerned that maybe he's referring to some type of buried treasure. Okay, fine. So we'll say that's the machlokes in Rav. Rav Papa, my time alone occurs this. We'll say, why does Rav Papa not agree with Rav Zvid? Amud Beis, Kasav Rav Papa, Ki Amar Rav Lo Shna B'Milva V'Lo Shna B'Pikadon. Because I will say, ultimately, again, Rav Papa holds that Rav was not making a distinction between a loan or a deposit. And I will say the concept of Mamad Shlashtan, the Gemara is assuming right now only applies to a deposit, doesn't apply to a loan. Again, we'll talk about that in just a bit. But let me just say right now, the reason why would Mamad Shlashtan work only with a deposit and not with a loan? What's the difference between a deposit and a loan? Right? A deposit is always extant. Right? A deposit is there. A deposit is there. It's present, right? Remember again, what's the deposit? I'm giving someone something to hold. Are they allowed to use the deposit? Allowed to use the deposit? No. You'll say generally you're not allowed to use a pikadon, right? As opposed to a loan. When it comes to a loan, the halach is milva lahotsa'a nitna. That ultimately, again, a loan actually becomes the property of the borrower. So therefore, the Gemara is presupposing that the concept of Ma'amad Shlashta, which means the ability of party A to assign its interest to party C, just through a verbal communication, only works when the item being assigned is extant and identifiable. It's identifiable. So therefore the Gemara says, Rav Papa doesn't hold of Rav Zavid, because Rav Zavid's approach only works by a pikadon, doesn't work by a halva. Okay. Furthermore, Rav Zavid, we'll say second line down, your Gimel base 13b. Rav Zavid, my time alone, Rav Papa. Why doesn't Rav Zavid hold like Rav Papa? So I'll say because ultimately, again, Rav Zavid says it doesn't make sense that the Mishnah is talking about a shchiv mira, someone on their deathbed. It doesn't make sense. Mimai, why not? Midiktani haomer tinu get sel ishti ushta shecher zel avdi umeis lo yitnu la'achar misa. Right? So how did the Mishnah start? The Mishnah started by saying a man says to his agent, "Give this get to my wife," or "Give this shtar shecher to my eved," and then the husband or the master dies. What's talacha? You can't give after death. Taima demes. Now the reason ultimately again you can't give this get or you can't give the shtar shecher is why? Because the guy died, because the husband or the master died. Hamechayim nosnin. But ultimately, if he was still alive, you'd be able to give it. Taima da'amar tnu. Furthermore, the only reason ultimately, again, you give it is because he said give it. Halo amar tnu. But you can infer from this, if he would not have said give, you don't give. Now I was saying, now why is this interesting? Ushchiv mira afagav de lo amar tnu nosnin. I will say, shchiv mira, listen to this. A shchiv mira, even if a shchiv mira didn't say give the get, you still give it. Now watch this. This is fascinating. Here we go. Barishona hayu omrim. They used to say as follows: Hayotse bakolar. Right? If somebody was taken out to be executed, right? Va'amar kisvu get leishti. Right? So imagine the following situation: Ruvain is being led out to be executed, right? And as he's being led out, he calls out to a group of people, write a get for my wife. They will say, why would Reuven want to do that? He's about to be executed. Why does he want to do that? Yibum, right? Let's say again, he doesn't have children. He doesn't want his wife to be a yavama. He'd rather her be a grusha. So he calls out to a group of people, write a get for my wife. Now I will say, ideally, we're going to see that when you commission a group to go ahead and take care of a get for your wife, what do you really want to say? What's the proper way to issue that instruction? Kisvu utnu. Write it and give it, right? Because writing a get by itself is meaningless. The get is only meaningful if it's written and then delivered. So ultimately, the Gemara says, so what happens though? So watch this case. So Reuven's being led out to be executed. He says to a group, write a get for my wife. So we'll say, what's talacha? Hari elu yichtevu v'yitnu. Ultimately, again, they're able to go ahead and write it and give it. But he didn't say give it. I will say, take a look at Rashi. Rashi's right across to the left. So let's listen to this. We assume that Reuven meant to say what? He meant to say, give her the get as well. So why didn't he say it? Why didn't he say it? Reuven's got a lot on his mind. Right? He's got a lot on his mind. He's about to be executed. So we assume his omission of tnu was simply just an oversight. He's bahol. He's overwhelmed by what's about to occur. And therefore, halacha l'maaseh, he just didn't say it. So we'll say, this is very important. So therefore, again, we understand that when he said kisvu, he really meant tnu as well. Now watch this. Chazru lomar, Chazal then extended this to include other cases as well. Af ha-mefarish vayotze b'shara. So we'll say they used it to also include cases of someone who goes ahead and travels far distances, either travels by sea or travels by a caravan in the desert. So we'll say, let's say a guy gets on a boat. Now we'll say sea travel, ocean travel is very dangerous. So a guy gets on a boat. Before he gets on the boat, he says to a group of people, write a get for my wife. And we'll say, what did he forget to say? What did he forget? Tnu. So we assume, once again, he's got a lot on his mind. So therefore, we understand that what he meant was write it and deliver it. Rabbi Shimon Shazuri Omer Af HaMesukan. Rabbi Shimon Shazuri said, even someone who is in danger. I will say danger, for example, Shchiv Mira. shchiv meira, that even though ideally, ultimately, again, a shchiv meira should say, kisvu utenu, ultimately, again, even if the shchiv meira left off tenu, but he just said kisvu, we understand what he means, but we also understand, once again, the shchiv meira has a lot on his mind, and that's why he forgot the tenu. So therefore, Rabbi the Gemara says like this. Remember, again, we're trying to figure out why Rav Zavid did not hold like Rav Papa. So remember that ultimately, based on the Mishnah, what you would infer is that if the Baal did not say Tenu, we would not give it. But if the Mishnah is really talking about a Shchiv Meira, then in reality, a Shchiv Meira, even if he doesn't say Tenu, we would still go ahead and give it. So Maskef Rav Ashi, so Rav Ashi says, Uman neimalon demasnisin Rabbi Shimon Shazurihi dilmurabananhi. Maybe ultimately, again, the Mishnah is not Rabbi Shimon Shazuri. Maybe it's ultimately reflective of the view of the Rabbanon. Okay, so fine, Rabbi say. So that brings this piece to a close. Rabbi say. So essentially, what we're left with is as follows. Here's what we know from our Mishnah. Number one, husband commissions an agent to go ahead and give a get, and then he dies. What's the halacha? You don't give a get after death. Husband commissions an agent to go ahead and deliver a get shikrar, and then he dies. No get shikrar after death. Matt Ruvain says to Shaliach, give a mana to Ploni, right? Give a mana to Ploni, and then he dies. Ultimately, what happens? The gift is still given. Now, I will say, here's the problem we ran into. Rav comes along and Rav decides to qualify the Mishnah saying, what's the case of a mana, which can be given after the death of Ruvain? Only a mana that is tziburin umunachin b'keren zavis. It's piled, right, and literally is in a corner. In other words, it's extant and it's visible. Machlokes, then, Rav Zavid and Rav Papa, what the case is. Rav Zavid says ultimately it's a Maimad Shlashtan case. That's the case over here. The case of Rabbi Say, the Chiddush over, which we're going to get into in just a moment, the Chiddush of Rabbi Say is the ability to transfer an item in the presence of interested parties. I should say it differently. The Chiddush is the ability to verbally transfer ownership of an item without a formal kinyan, as long as all three parties are present. But again, Rav would say that's only if the money itself is actively extant. Rav Papa says no, it's a case of shchiv mira. It's a case of shchiv mira, and the chiddush of Rav is even the case of shchiv mira, you could only go ahead and give a posthumous gift when the money itself was clearly identifiable and extant. Good. Shabbos say, with the resolution, we haven't gotten to yet. Now, both say we're going to jump into the world of Ma'amad Shlashtan, which is really very interesting. Just before we go on, I'll just mention something very beautiful. In the Sefer Siach HaParsha, he writes over here, he writes something fascinating. He says, what's the pshat of divrei shchiv mira kiksuvin dechimsurin damu? Right, we've already mentioned this a number of different times, which is that, right, Chazal made this interesting takana by a shchiv mira. Person is deathly alone on his deathbed. So normally, in order to affect transactional realities, what do you need? You need a kinyan, or different types of kinyanim. A shchiv mira, like, is able to work halachic magic. Whatever a shchiv mira says, right? It's like Pharaoh in 10 Commandments, right? So that it be written, so that it be done, right? So that. No, you're all so young. No one remembers 10 Commandments anymore. Okay, fine. Right, it was a movie back when movies were kosher, right? So I'll say, so what happens? So a shchiv mira has the ability to go ahead and say, that, right? He says, give a money to Ploni, it's done, right? In other words, even without the kinyanim, whatever he says, his words have the ability to affect kinyanim. So we'll say, so the Sefer Siach HaParsha writes, why? Why did Chazal institute that? So we'll say, so what's the Pashup Pshat? You know, person's on his deathbed. We don't want him to be plagued with worries about having to conform to certain transactional strictures. So instead, to kind of give him a little bit of inner quietude, nachas ruach, sheket, shal, v'shalom, right? We allow him to just affect things with his words. Siach HaParsha says there's something deeper. I will say, what is the most important thing to do on your deathbed? The most important thing to do on your deathbed? Tshuva. See, I will say, the most important thing is to make sure that I don't leave this world without having done tshuva. I have to do tshuva. And I will say, now, the truth is, the real reality, like the Mishnah says, the Gemara says, is shuv yom echad lifnei misasecha. So make sure to do tshuva one day before you die. You don't know that you're going to have a deathbed. Maybe a person just dies, in an instant, and there's no deathbed at all. So I have to really do tshuva, right, the day before I die. Like the Gemara says, the day before you die, right? Live life in a state of tshuva. But the truth is, the derech of man is most of us don't live that way. But what Chazal wanted was, persons on their deathbed, they know that the end is coming. There's a golden opportunity to do tshuva. There's a golden opportunity to go ahead and right the wrongs. There's a golden opportunity, at least cognitively, to say, HaKadosh Baruch Hu, I'm sorry for what I've done. I made my mistakes in life, but I truly regret and have remorse for having done them. I don't have more time, so I'm not going to be able to go ahead and necessarily actively right the wrongs, but at least in my mind, and at least in my heart, and at least in my soul, I could do tshuva. So I'll say what Chazal wanted to do was to free a person of all the other worries that come at end of life, so that they could be fully occupied with tshuva. So divrei shchina. Okay, so decide. You want to give this to that one. You want to do this to that one. You're going to, no problem. Just say it. So let it be written. So let it be done. Not even submitted. Let it be spoken. Let it be done. That's it. You could take care of all of your affairs in a matter of minutes. Now that you're done with all of that, focus on the most important thing you need to do on your deathbed, which is tshuva. We'll say, isn't that incredible? Chazal wanted so badly for us to do tshuva before they leave this world that they totally contorted transactional law to allow things which could normally never happen in any other context, so that you and I have the ability to do tshuva before we die, before we leave this world. That's the svara of divrei shchimira kiksuvin v'chimsurin dam. Transactional law has changed in order to allow, facilitate, and enable true tshuva. And I will say, if that's the lengths that Chazal went to in order to allow us to do tshuva, you know what the message is. Don't wait till a deathbed. I will say, we all have things that are in a state of disrepair, right? Each and every one of us have things that we need to do tshuva for. Don't wait until Elul. Don't wait until Rosh Hashanah. Don't wait until the deathbed. Whatever tshuva has to be done, do it today. Let's go weiter. So now we come to an amazing sugya. So the Gemara says, Gufa, Amrav Hu Amarav, Manali Biyadecha. So we'll say, here we go. Let's get another couple of minutes in. So we'll say, let's take a step back. So remember again, what do we know about, this is my much shlashna now. Here it is. Manali Biyadecha, Tinei lo leploni, my much shlashna kana. So we'll say, here we go. Listen to this case. Ruvain deposited $1,000 with Shimon. Okay, so remember again, let's just keep this simple, right? So ultimately, again, that is an old school ringer, right? That's like Nokia phones from the beginning, right? That's mamisha. All right, so what happens? Well, so now let's take a step back, right? So Ruvain deposited $1,000 with Shimon. Okay, who does Shimon have to give the money back to? I know this sounds. Who does he have to give it back to? Ruvain, right? What does Shimon have the ability to do with the pikadon? What are his rights in the pikadon? Can you use the pikadon? No. Can you assign a pikadon? No. Again, it's a custodianship. Okay, so now watch what's happening over here. Ruvain wants to convey ownership of the pikadon to Levi, a third party. So normally, before we learn this Gemara, we say no problem. How does Ruvain assign ownership interest of a pikadon to Levi? How would he do it? Again, Bepashtos, get it back from Shimon, right, and then give it to Levi, right? It's money. We're talking about money over here, right? We're talking about money. So the only real way to acquire money is Mashiach, is to take it. So normally, if Ruvain wants to get this money to Levi, he's got to get it back from Shimon, and then once he gets there, give it to Levi. Now wants to be introduced to something dramatically different. Listen to this. Now the Gemara says that if Ruvain, Shimon, and Levi are all standing together, right? Ruvain could say to Shimon, who is the current custodian, Manali biyadecha, I have $1,000 in your care, right? Deposit in your care. Give it to Levi. So what's the halacha? The ma'imad shlashtan kana. If all three of the parties are present, ultimately it works. So says the Gemara, Amarava. So Amarava, we'll say, now again, don't understand like the groundbreaking Chiddush in that? The groundbreaking Chiddush? We'll say, the groundbreaking Chiddush, we've just assigned ownership of money. How? Through Dibur. We'll say, can't do that. I mean, obviously you can't do it, right? Otherwise you can't, normally, if you want to acquire money, Mashiach, here the Chiddush is, you could assign ownership of money. How? But again, the only way it works is all three of the involved parties are present. So Rava says, Mistara Milsei Rabbi Pikadim. So we'll say, Rava says, it sounds like this concept of Maimed Shlashtan should only work with a Pikadon. About b'milva lo, but not with a loan. The Rabbi say, what's the difference again between a Pikadon and a loan? Right? Pikadon and milva. Pikadon is extant. It's there. It's present. Milva, Rabbi say, right? A loan is lo tzan nitna. So Rabbi say, a loan doesn't exist. When I say, what does it mean a loan doesn't exist? The money of the loan doesn't exist, right? The whole chap, Rabbi say, when you lend someone money, it's very important. When you lend someone money, right? Reuven lends Shimon money. Who owns the money? Who owns the money? Shimon. And I will say that money is Shimon's, and ultimately at the time of repayment, Shimon's obligated. So everyone says it's incredible. So therefore the Gemara wants to suggest over here that Allah Lamaisa Rava says, I think the concept of Maimed Shlashtan should really only apply to a Pikadon, but doesn't apply to a loan. Because since a Pikadon is extant, right? Since a Pikadon is there, that makes sense why it's assignable. But a loan, which is not extant, right? The milva lahotza nitna, right? A loan is given for the money to be spent, for the money to be used. It's not assignable. Ve'elokim, yet by God, Amarav, afilu b'milva. Rav says the truth is that Maimed Shlashtan works even for a loan. Incredible, I will say. So not only can you assign a pikadon in the presence of all three parties, but what? You could also assign a loan. So Reuven lent Shimon $10,000. Now again, Reuven is standing there with Shimon and Levi. Reuven could say to Shimon, the $10,000, don't pay it back to me, pay it back to Levi, and it works. So I will say, just to be clear, this is not just any three parties, right? Maimed Shlashtan is not just like a Beis Din, right? It's not any three people. Maimed Shlashtan is Dafkahu. Again, Reuven, right? The either the lender / depositor, Shimon, custodian / borrower, Levi, new owner. Good. It's my name. So we'll say we learned this as well. Amar Shmuel made the Levi. Shmuel said in the name of Levi, Milva li biadecha. Reuven says to Shimon, I lent you $10,000. Teneu lo leploni. Now I want you to give it to Levi, right? B'may shlashtan kana. We'll say as long as all three parties are present, Levi acquires the rights to the loan. Incredible, I will say. V'taima mai. So I'll say, now the Gemara says, why does this work? I don't understand. Why does it work? V'taima mai. Amra meimar naase ke'omer lo b'shas matan mos shabadna l'cha l'didach u'l'cha da'asu machmasecha. Well, say this is incredible. So Ravash, I'm sorry. Who said this? So Taima mai. What's the reason why it works? Ameimar says, both say, listen to this. When Reuven lends Shimon money, so essentially what Shimon says is, I obligate myself to you and to anyone who comes by dint of you. Right? In other words, this is in recognition, I will say, that loans are often assigned to other parties. So therefore, when Shimon borrows money from Reuven, essentially what Shimon agrees to is, at the time of the halva, anyone who you assign this loan to, right? At the time that Reuven lends Shimon the money, it's as if Shimon said, Shabadna l'chol didach, I am obligated to you, u'l'chol da'asu machmasecha, and whoever comes as a result of you. Therefore, again, when Reuven subsequently assigns the money to Levi, ultimately that's who Shimon repays. Here's the problem. El me'ata, using this logic, hikna lenoladim delo havu b'shas matan mos. Ooh, so fascinating. They will say, watch this. What happens if Reuven lent Shimon money for 20 years? Okay? And now what happens? So now Levi is born 5 years after the loan was made. And now what happens? Levi becomes bar mitzvah as a bar mitzvah gift. So Reuven wants to give Levi the debt. So he wants to assign Shimon's debt to Levi. Here's the problem. Levi was not alive at the time the loan was made. Using this logic, therefore what? The loan should not be assignable. Because based on what Ameimar said, is ultimately, again, Shimon is committing himself ultimately, again, to pay back Reuven or to anyone else who Reuven decides to go ahead and assign the loan to. We're presupposing that whoever Reuven would assign the loan to was what? Was alive at the time of the actual transaction. So Hachinami Delokanu. Because we'll say even according to Rabbi Meir, who holds that a person could go ahead and assign ownership or convey ownership of something that has not yet come into existence. We'll say even that has to be something that somewhat exists in the world. Well, a good example of this is Rabbi Meir holds that a person could sell dates that have not yet come into existence. And I will say, but even though dates haven't come into existence, what has come into existence? The tree. So therefore, there's some element of the item that exists. Even Rabbi Meir holds that what? Low. So I will say, but rather again, for something that does not exist in the world at all, even Rabbi Meir would agree that you can't assign or be maknet to that. So therefore, I will say, according to Rabbi Meir's interpretation, the loan would only be assignable to who? To a third party who was alive at the time of the original loan. So I'll say, no, here's the logic. I'll say, this is great. I will say, why does Maimon Shlashton work? Bahi hana the kamishtanyle bein top of Yudalit. Bein milva yeshana milva chadasha kam mishavin nefshe. So we'll say this is incredible. Actually, we'll say, you know what? Let's stop over here for today. I don't want to rush for this. We'll stop with this. We'll say, so again, is this not exciting? Is this not exciting? So we'll say, I just want to point out what's happening over here. Something that is halachically impossible has become possible. I will say, it's not even 9 o'clock in the morning, and you've already seen the impossible become possible. Can you imagine what kind of day this is going to be? So I'll say, so again, what do I mean the impossible become possible? The only way to transfer money to another party is through a mashicha. Now we've learned that, no, there's another mechanism called Maimon Shlashton. Maimon Shlashton says that ultimately, again, we'll call it, and now we've also established it works by Pikadon and by Milva. So let's call it the lender, the borrower, and the lender could assign the debt, or the owner could assign the Pikadon to a third party just verbally. As long as all three parties are present, there could be verbal assignment, and I will say that verbal assignment makes Levi, the third party, the new owner. Why that works and how that works, Emir Hashem, we'll discover the answer to that tomorrow. I will say, Shkoyach.